Hey, welcome back to KP Unpacked. This is where the biggest ideas in AEC, AI, and innovation, they all collide in one podcast that's powered by Reddy Co. This is where we break down the trends, the technologies, the discussions, and the strategies that are shaping the built environment and beyond. My name is Jeff Echols. I'm the Executive Director of Catalyst here at Reddy Co. And I am joined by my colleague and teammate, Frank Lazzaro, who is heading up our AI advisory, as well as a lot of other things. But I mentioned AI advisory because that's what we're here to talk about. This is AI and AEC, or AI Unpacked. Talking about that before we went live. It's like, what are we calling this thing now? This is the time for Frank and I to come together and unpack some sort of AI tool, some sort of something to do with AI, and find actionable ways for you in an AEC firm to implement these things that we're talking about. Yeah. So Frank, thank you for joining me again today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I always think about, like, leading up to this, you know, when we start discussing the show notes and conversations that I have, it's like, I have so many different topics that I want to kind of feed into this. It's almost kind of like, which one do we pick today? But no, that just means that, you know, we're going to have a lot to talk about for the rest of the year. So it's really exciting. So
yeah. And that's one of the beauties here. We can take one thing and we can dive into it, you know, break things down into really small pieces. And I think that does. And the feedback that we get tells us that it does really help, right? Making it actionable, making it digestible, first of all, but then making it actionable. You know, and I ask you that at the end of every episode. It's like, okay, what's one thing that someone, a leader in an AEC firm, needs to do with this information today, right? I think that's what's unique about this and very valuable about these conversations. They're also fun. Yeah. We get to talk about some fun things.
Absolutely. You know, it's great about this topic. This topic actually came from a client conversation. So cool. This seems to be top of mind because, oddly enough, unscripted, unprovoked, I got a LinkedIn message asking me about this topic today. So the timeliness of it is uncanny. But I think what we're going to find is that, you know, this concept of custom GPTs is really top of mind for a lot of firms and a lot of teams. So I'm looking forward to diving into this today. So
yeah, there are a lot, as you know, and maybe folks that are listening know. I facilitate all of our mastermind groups, and in our innovation leaders mastermind groups, especially, we hear a lot about custom GPTs, right? What they're building in-house for knowledge transfer, et cetera. This is a very, very popular topic, and you know, these are tools that are being used throughout the industry. And if you don't know about custom GPTs, get ready for the knowledge bombs, because here we go. We're going to talk about custom GPTs in your firm's knowledge center, and today we're going to touch on a couple of different tools. You've picked a couple to focus on here, as usual, as you do every week. So what are the tools that you're selecting for today's conversation?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. And it's interesting is that I think the tool, like, availability has really evolved within the last, like, 6 months. Because if we take a step back, let's start at the beginning. The only option that you had a year ago, 2 years ago, was to really do like a enterprise implementation, custom development of ChatGPT. Right. That requires software developers. It required, you know, having advanced knowledge. You had to teach the data. You had to do so many things to actually get it to work. Now you have all these new tools out that are really low code or no code, that basically give you the same functionality that they were that you would get through a custom implementation, say 2 years ago. You can deploy something within days now. And some of the tools that we've been looking at, and some of the tools that we support our clients with, is, you know, the Azure AI Foundry is one that's really kind of popped up on the radar. You know, you get to pick a bunch of different GPTs in the back end. You don't have to use Copilot. You could use the OpenAI or Grok or Llama or any of like the more commercialized versions. But you get all the the ability to customize without actually having to worry about all the coding.
Mhm.
That's a really fascinating one. And I look forward to kind of diving into that one. And the second tool I want to talk about today is that earlier this year, OpenAI ChatGPT launched a new feature called Projects. And what's really cool about Projects is that instead of coding like a chat bot to do something specific, you can actually just kind of create a chat that allows you to kind of add documents to this project folder. And then anytime you chat within that folder, it uses those files. So you basically get that mini version of a call it a custom GPT using an off-the-shelf tool. So both of those tools are definitely on our radar, and those are things that I think our clients have been asking for. What's really cool about that is it's low code, no code, fast deployment, and relatively inexpensive. You're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to customize a tool. You're basically just using something that's off the shelf.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, we talked about Project in the same episode that we talked about Google Notebook LM,
Yep. Same concept.
5
Yeah.
5 episodes ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So if you missed that, just go back. Just go back a few
Mhm.
episodes and you'll find Frank and I talking about ChatGPT Project and
Yeah.
Google Notebook LM.
Notebook. Yeah. So
Yep.
yeah, what's interesting. So I guess the question is going to come up like, what's the difference between like Notebook and projects? Not only you add like project files, right? Both of them actually have the ability to add project files, but ChatGPT Projects gives you another option or configuration module where you can actually add instructions. So it's
Mhm.
almost kind of like I give you files and then I'm going to give you instructions on how I want this bot to work. So
Mhm.
it almost takes it one step up in terms of, yes, you can use Notebook and you could use ChatGPT to kind of work off of multiple files, but being able to create a repeatable project file to where every time you chat inside that folder, it does that. And there's some really good examples of that. So obviously we use it internally here at KPR, right? It's one of those things to where not only are we telling our clients that they should
Mhm.
be using AI, but we also incorporate AI into some of our workflows as well. So when we think about doing an analysis with our dial assessment, right? I have a dial assessment chatbot that I use to kind of help me distill client notes, like if we do a workshop or we do something, how do I get a client to kind of think about like, are they a disruptor or are they an innovator? I have all of my base knowledge that sits there. And then anytime I interact with it, it's like, oh, XYZ company, I just did a workshop for them. Here are some of my thoughts in terms of how they answered some of these questions. How does that baseline against our dial assessment and our rules when it comes to innovation? So it just helps me simplify that and it's repeatable. So anytime I do
Mhm.
that, I just go back to my dial assessment chatbot and I'm able to interact with it. And it actually helps me as a dial consultant to be able to really dive deep into information off of all of the stuff out of KP's knowledge, out of my knowledge, and then we can actually come up and formulate a more cohesive answer and feedback that we can get back to the client.
Yeah, it's based on that or related to
Mhm.
that comment.
Yep.
It's not surprising that what we're talking about, like the custom GPTs, and then also including project and notebook,
Mhm.
they're often referred to as knowledge, the knowledge center, building the knowledge
Mhm.
center, or the firm librarian.
Mhm. Yes.
I think those are really good um, descriptive terms for them in the way that they're being used. When we
Yep.
think about this, when we think about implementing or building and implementing a whether it is a custom GPT or it is a project or a notebook, certainly we can do it for organization and
Mhm.
research or whatever the different use cases we could come up with. But is there is there a scenario, or can you explain the scenario where having a tool like this available to your people gives you some sort of competitive advantage?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. So consistently what we find when we talk to firms is that access to information seems to be very problematic for most
Hmm.
firms. We don't do project archiving really or project closeout very consistently or pretty well. We have information that tends to be scattered across the organization. We had a server on site, but now we're in the cloud. We have some stuff in Teams and we have stuff in SharePoint. And Jeff, this even internally, right at KPR, like up until recently when we expanded our operations team, we had information that was just kind of disparate. It was all over the place, and it's hard to sit there and say, well, this project or this client looks like another thing that I've done before. Where was
Sure.
that document? How can I go back and reference that? So this concept of a firm librarian or knowledge center gives you that competitive advantage, because if you could come back and say, let me identify the top 5 projects for this RFP that I can include in my submittal and I can find it relatively fast, that is a competitive advantage because you're not wasting time, right? So if it takes you 40 hours to do a submittal, but you can cut that time down to 20 hours because you have access to information, that becomes highly valuable. Being able to look across I had another client that came back and we were talking about using pricing tables, comparing pricing tables to where they ended up, but being able to go back and find those other pricing tables so that when they're pricing out a new job or they're doing something along that, they have access to that knowledge so that they're not losing money or they're not leaving money on the table by not pricing things correctly because they don't have the ability to go back and look at that information. That becomes a competitive advantage. So just having access, readily accessible information becomes the advantage, because the faster you can get to it, the more accurate that you're going to be, and less time you're going to waste. It's a more of an efficiency play as well. It just centralizes the knowledge, right? It just gives you, I don't know, delivers consistent answers firm wide. So if I go in and ask the question about our pricing and you ask a question about the pricing, we're all pulling from the same data. So there's some consistency, it centralizes, there's a lot of advantages that would make you more competitive in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, think about this as you're listening to this, and maybe this hasn't resonated with you yet, but think about what if you're on the let me say it this way, if you're on the client side, why what is one of the reasons, what's one of the decision making factors for selecting one firm over another firm?
Right.
Oftentimes, it's experience. It's
Hmm.
years in the business, it's experience, it's the level of the engineers, the architects, or whoever they are. And so there's so much in AEC firms, which is true for all professional services firms. There's so much banking being done
Hmm.
on the experience and knowledge of the in-house talent.
Yeah. And usually it all lives in somebody's head.
It lives in somebody's head. It's disorganized on their desktop, in their
Hmm.
P drive,
Yeah.
wherever, right?
Well, I know that, and
And
the firm that I worked at, we would run into issues to where we couldn't find the final submittal. Like
Mhm,
I would be able to find all the drafts, but I'd be like, well, who has the absolute like the final one?
yeah, the
um,
client.
and that's a challenge when you really want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward.
Mhm, yeah, and there are examples out there, you can Google this, but there are examples out there, and we're seeing this again, the innovation leaders who participate in our, mastermind groups, they're all doing this. They're all building
Yeah.
these custom GPTs, um, but think about that knowledge, that's in your senior engineers, your senior architects, your senior construction managers, whoever they are.
Hmm.
Um, what happens when they're not there anymore,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, the you can build this, you can have that firm librarian that has all of that knowledge, right? They can
Mhm.
access all the knowledge that was once in that senior engineer or whoever it was, um, that's that's inside their head. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we're talking about here is
Yeah.
we've got, different versions of, experience gaps, generation gaps. We've got, you know, certain generations aging out, certain generations coming up into leadership. Certain generations like mine and Frank's that are like, I don't know, apparently we're the lost boys or something. But um, how do you retain that
Yeah.
from this generation to that generation while skipping over Frank and I? How do you retain that knowledge and retain that advantage? If that was
Yeah.
in fact your advantage, how do you retain that? So
Yeah.
I think this is a really important conversation here. Um, we can.
It's interesting though, Jeff, too. So if you ever spend any time talking with KP when we're thinking about custom GPTs or just the AI chatbots or the agents in general,
Mhm,
he's under the firm belief that the person that can figure this out from a knowledge perspective is going to have a huge competitive advantage, right?
sure.
So when you start thinking about, you know, all codes and regulations. They're in some document, they're in some book, they're online. But being able to access that stuff, more effectively with AI,
Right.
it's going to be a game changer for our industry in a lot of ways because, you know, we are basically run by books, whether it's, it's a yellow book, blue book, red book, whatever they call them, right? ICC, those books, we always reference those, but if you can make them digital and turn them into a library or a knowledge center, and be able to access them quickly, could we produce bigger, better, faster, safer, bridges, buildings, roads? So I think there's a lot of value in this more broader term outside of the firm as well.
Yeah, yeah, and so there are products out there.
Yep.
Um, there are some out there that are doing that with codes
Mhm.
and one of the biggest struggles. So I do this with my graduate students, right? There's a couple things that always come up when they're thinking about, okay, well, how can we make the AEC better, right? And they come up with, well,
Mhm.
what if we create some sort of AI that helps us um, analyze, do our code research, analyze projects per code and things like that. It's like, well, there's there's one major one out there that has been in the news, right? They've won some important lawsuits and whatnot, but I've actually interviewed their founder before, and one of the big problems that we have, at least in the United States, is codes vary by jurisdiction.
Mhm.
And so that it's a huge task to build that as a product. However, right, if you are a firm that specializes in XYZ in certain areas, all of a sudden that amount of data just shrunk drastically.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so that changes the equation. And another one that the students will touch on is, well, what about um, code submission? Like for building permit, same thing, right? It varies. How are you going to put together a some sort of automated process for code building code review and permit submission when that process varies by every jurisdiction across the United States, which is,
Yeah.
I don't even know the number, right? It's in
Yeah.
the thousands. Um, but
Well, we ran into that issue just even on the residential side. So the town that I live in, it was an unincorporated county, and then the little area got carved out and became a city. And
Mhm,
at the time, we were having our water heater replaced, and the
mhm,
plumber put the water heater in based off of the county code, but then there also had to be a city inspection, and their code was slightly different, so the expansion tank was slightly different. So it's like you start thinking about like even at the integrator level, the person that's actually doing the work, if they had access to that kind of information, so as the plumber is at your house doing something, he knows that, oh, we need to use this size expansion tank versus that or something, whatever it may be. um yeah, that, I mean, even at the residential level, I think you'd see a lot of benefit. But now take that and you scale it up to a 20-story building, there's a lot of more code that you got to deal with, right? There's a lot more things, and it becomes more expensive versus residential. But
Yeah.
yeah, I could definitely see the value in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great example. Back in my architecture days, we worked on a project that spanned 2 jurisdictions. It's a
Yeah.
street down the middle of the project, and one is in one jurisdiction, one is another jurisdiction. It happened to be in a state where everything was local. So
Yes.
there's a code here and a code there, right? Same building, same project, right? But you've got to you've got to review it and apply it differently on one side
Hmm.
of the street versus the other side of the street. And
Yeah.
tools like this could greatly facilitate
Yeah.
um, that work. So, okay, let's dig into some of the specifics a little bit more. You mentioned Azure AI Foundry, which we hear about, a
Hmm.
lot about in our
Yep.
mastermind group. So, tell me more about Azure AI.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, what's really cool about this one is that obviously Microsoft wants you to kind of store their data in their cloud, right? The Azure cloud. Um, but the way this works is that you basically create a playground, right? A chatbot playground, which one gives you the option to select one of like 2,000 different AI models on the back end. There's the obvious ones like ChatGPT and Copilot, et cetera. But for those that want to use ChatGPT but don't want to use the off-the-shelf ChatGPT, this is a great option because it gives you the ability to customize and control, and really kind of deploy. And so all you really do is, and the other nice thing about Azure is that you can actually just point your data index to somewhere that's already in your environment. So you don't have to copy or move or do anything special with your data. All you have to do is really index it. And once it's indexed, you just point to it. So the beautiful part about that is that your data stays your data and it stays within your Azure environment. You can access all of your data. You're not like, so that's the one big difference between ChatGPT projects and the Azure Foundry is ChatGPT projects limit you to 20 files, right? So you cap out at about 20 files and then you're done. Foundry can take all of your data. Just all you do is just point it to a SharePoint folder or another folder, could have hundreds of thousands of documents in it, doesn't matter. So you get a lot of flexibility on that. And then once you write the instructions, all you do is deploy it as a web app and you're good to go. So you get all the customizing of it, meaning I can have as much data as I want. It's my data. I can write custom instructions. I can pick the model that I want to use to do this, ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 4.5, um, you know, Grok, Llama, whatever you want. Once you pick that, and then you deploy it, so you get all the ability. You don't have to customize you don't have to code the interface. You don't have to code the data connections. You don't have to code anything. All you do is just like really point and click. So it makes the customization really good. So this is what I would call the Cadillac version of custom GPTs with the no code, low code, right? So you get a lot of flexibility in there. Say you only want to do it on a smaller scale, ChatGPT projects would be a better option because it's even simpler than the Azure Foundry, right? So one, you would have to upload your 20 documents, but once you upload your 20 documents and you write your instructions, you're done. So there's no other deployment on that. Now you do get the safety and security that you do get in the Azure Foundry, as long as you're on ChatGPT Teams or ChatGPT Enterprise. You get all the data protections. So you get all the benefits of the data protections. You're just limited in the number of files that you can use in ChatGPT Project versus Foundry. The only other downside with ChatGPT projects is you have to use ChatGPT, right? You can't pick different models underneath there. So thing about Azure Foundry is it operates exactly the same. It's just you get more flexibility, more capabilities is really the big difference between the two.
So let me ask you this, because we know that AI is good with dealing with lots and lots of data.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be like a Mr. Obvious question because we've talked about Chat GPT projects and we've talked about Google
Mm-hmm.
Notebook, and right, you create a notebook for this and a notebook for that. But when you're thinking about the idea of the firm librarian, of
Mm-hmm.
course, there are the project based things like building codes and material science and all kinds of
Mhm.
things that AEC firms have that need to be referenced. But then there's also operational things.
Yep.
And then of course there's HR things and IT department. There's all there's all kinds of departments and things.
Mhm.
Would you create one chatbot to rule them all, or
Yeah.
would you break it down and here's our bot for HR and here's our bot for IT and here's our bot for projects and maybe even specific types of project verticals, project type verticals or something like that. But strategically, how would you look at it?
Strategically, I would create a bot for each of those different functions or operations,
Mhm.
right? Because I think that if you can tighten up the content for whatever the bot is, it's going to perform better. So if you have a bot just for project resumes, it's going to do much better if it's only focused on project resumes and it doesn't have to sort through all this other data that's not necessarily related to what it's looking for. The beautiful part about this is that you could easily create these bots like you're just talking about quick deployment. So they're very easy to create. So creating, specific bots for different tasks would be something that I would do. Like I would have a resume bot, I would have a proposal bot, I would have an SOPs, I would have a proposal lookup bot. It's not that they're hard to create, and you're going to get better results, better performance when they're kind of tightly tuned to one specific task.
And then you can create a bot to rule them all.
That's right. And one bot to rule them all. It's like the little ring. And if you set it on fire, it glows.
Yes. Well, I'm pretty sure we can make it glow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we know that if we create these custom GPTs, it helps us to centralize the knowledge. It
Mhm.
helps us to share that knowledge, right? To distribute that knowledge um, the word just went out of my head, but to pass that knowledge along. We know that we haven't really talked about it necessarily, but we can ramp up, we can get people onboarded faster,
Mhm.
right? In terms of hiring, hey,
Mhm.
here's all the trainings, here's all the things you need to know.
Yeah.
We can also take a junior engineer and share with them more readily information from a senior engineer, some of that knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, and we know that having these custom GPTs in place with the data in place helps us to deliver and
Mhm.
find consistent answers firm wide all
Yeah.
the time, which is huge. I mean, the
Yep.
inconsistency back in the when started my career and I was working in marketing and business development, part of the time we went to file drawers, right, and pulled out pieces of paper, right, and
Right.
hey, maybe someone modified that and kept it in their own file cabinet, right? So this changes um, that equation completely.
Mhm.
So those are some of the pros.
Yep.
What are some of the cons? Um, Around creating our own custom GPTs.
The one big con right up front is this is the concept of build versus buy. If you build this, you own it. So you have to maintain it, right?
Mhm.
So making sure that you've built a structure in place to make sure that there's a governance, like what data is going into the bots, how often is it reviewed, when is it refreshed? So that whole concept of that upfront training, but then it's also the configuration and the maintenance of it, right? If you bought this ChatGPT off of the shelf and you just kind of use the tool, it's the tool is the tool, and you don't have to worry about that maintenance part. When you build a bot, yes, you're going to get a lot of benefit from it. It's very customized to you. It's very customized to your data. But you got to remember, if you build it, you own it. And if you own it, that means you're going to have to put resources and time in
Mhm.
maintaining it, particularly around governance, the initial ramp up right around, just training the model. When we say train, it's basically giving it data. You're
Yeah.
going to have to go through the effort of giving it the right data the first time. Then you got to configure and maintain that going forward. Like, how often do you go back and refresh the data,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Is it once a quarter? Is it once every 6 months? What's your governance process about adding and removing content from the model, right? So those are all the things that you need to take into consideration. Yes, it's kind of great that you can do all of that and have a customized bot, but you build it, you own it, and you got to maintain it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the biggest con. So, the governance, keeping it up to date, getting the data there, and just kind of making sure that you can maintain it going forward. It's going to essentially make sure that the tool is staying as productive and producing the content that you want going forward. You just can't set it and forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that explanation, you just touched on at least a lot of the episodes that we've had so far, right? Governance and policies and training and all of those things. So okay, so that's really good information. We need to remember, the idea that we're talking about here is we're talking about these custom GPTs. It's not just a chat bot. It is, in fact, your internal expert on whatever, right? You were talking about the different chatbots that you might have. So it is your internal expert. So in order for us, I ask you this at the end of every episode, how does the listener make this actionable? What's one thing that they need to do with everything that they heard us talking about today? What's one thing they need to do today to start to implement this idea of creating a custom GPT?
I think we've said this numerous times before, but identify that one problem first, right? You don't have to try to solve and try to do something really big, but just go and say, what I want to do is I want to create a bot around finding information out of past proposals, and just start with that one project and build yourself call it a minimal viable product or a proof of concept, right? Go create a ChatGPT project or test something in Foundry, but with just one small thing and kind of see how it works, understand how it works. And what you're going to find is that once you kind of get that first one built, you're going to find use case after use case after use case that you're going to want to build more. So again, I think we've said this numerous times before, but start with the problem, start with one small thing that you think you can solve, right? I want to be able to look up past projects. I want to look at past proposals. I want to do something to where I'm just querying information that we have to see how it works. You'll get addicted to it, and then you'll eventually want to kind of continue to expand it to other parts of the organization.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we hear that. Hey, we were trying to do this, but it just got too big and too unruly and whatever. And it's started too big. Right.
Yeah.
And it
get the small win.
Yeah. And a lot of times it makes sense to start small like that, get that small win, build something well the first time, and then continue to iterate on it.
Yeah.
Build the next one like that. All right, Frank, this has been a good one. This has been fun. I am always curious when we record one of these and we know it's going to be published. It's going to roll out via YouTube and the different podcast platforms in a week or two, whatever our production schedule is. I'm always curious to know how people are implementing what we're talking about. So as you're listening to this, first of all, the things that we've talked about, Azure, chat, notebook, all the things that we've touched on. Don't worry about figuring it out, Googling it, whatever. Our production team's putting the links in the show notes below. So just go down there, find the link, click on it, and you're good to go. So don't worry about that. The other thing is, as you listen to these, and I still think it's easier, which again is odd to me because this started out as a literal podcast. So I always think about this as an audio, but we publish this in audio and video. I think it's easier for you to do this on YouTube, but wherever it is that you consume this, in the show notes, you'll find the links and whatever. And we would like for you to ask us questions, to make comments, to give us feedback on everything that we're talking about, because that helps to guide. Frank said that right at the very beginning of this episode today, that this topic comes from work with a client, and he got a message about it, coincidentally got a message about it via LinkedIn today, right? The day that we're recording this. So we're always open to and welcome and craving your feedback, your questions, your comments on these, because that'll guide topics that we cover in the future. There's no shortage of topics around AI for AEC, none whatsoever, but we want to make sure that what we're talking about is the most relevant to you, and it's the things that resonate with you and your work. So do us that favor. Go wherever it is that you consume this, and leave us a question or a comment. Let us know what you think, what you're wondering about, what you need to know more about, and we will respond to that. So thank you for listening to this. Thank you, or watching this, whichever version you're doing. And Frank, as always, I appreciate you joining me for this today, and we'll do it again next week.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Always look forward to our conversations, Jeff.
Yeah, it's fun. I like digging into this one. So thanks for that. This is KP Unpacked. It's where the biggest ideas in AEC, AI, and innovation all collide in one podcast, powered by KP Reddy Co. This is where we break down the trends, the technology, the discussions, and the strategies that are shaping the built environment and beyond. That means where you live, where you work, where you play, where you pray, all the things that you do in the built environment. Everything that we talk about here in the various versions of this podcast are impacting those places and probably your life. So we appreciate you being here. And as I said earlier, my name is Jeff Echols. I'm the executive director of Catalyst. Catalyst is quickly becoming the hub for everything that we do. Our integrated owners forum, our mastermind groups, our advisory work, of course, conversations about AI. Our research team is publishing articles there on a daily basis. So you'll hear more about that in the post roll here. You heard about it in the pre-roll. You'll find links to it in the show notes below. So check out Catalyst. It's our brand new online community, and we want you to be a catalyst. So we'll see you there. We'll be back again next week. We appreciate you. And actually, Frank and I are going to see each other in just a couple of days in Atlanta for our Q2 second quarter, 1 day in-person mastermind event. So Frank, I'll see you in a couple of days.
Absolutely. Look forward to having you down.
Absolutely. It'll be great to be back. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. That's it for today. If this chat sparked something, Catalyst is where we keep the conversation going. This uniquely engaging space is where the top minds in our industry all come together and shape what's next in AEC. Ignite innovation. Join the waitlist at kpreddy.co. That's kpreddy.co. Hope to see you there.